What is your creepiest or most unnerving experience? Story 1. Work security for a local security company that was just starting up and specialized in monitoring heavy equipment out in the orchards. I had no radio, no gun, no mace, no flashlight, and no phone service. I was strictly there to monitor and take notes, but if anything did happen, the nearest help was 30 to 45 minutes away in town. Fast forward to a few weeks of night shifts along the levee, with being surrounded by orchards, and I was pretty comfortable at my new location, with its one road in and one road out, as the only entrance for a few miles. It was about 2:30 in the morning when I heard an alarm clock going off somewhere in the murky darkness. I'm positioned alongside the levee in this position, plus my car being on the right. The levee is the plus and the alarm sound coming from the sound on my left. I turn my car on and drive over to the levee where the workers had a portable office container with a few chairs and a table set up where it sounds like the alarm is coming from. As my dim high beams start to sweep across the orchard, I see a dark figure, multiple rows back, seem to fade behind a tree quickly. I stop there and stare into the darkness, barely disrupted by my post car's headlights. Nothing moves and I can hear the alarm still going off, so I get out of my car and use my phone's light. I find the culprit set up on a white plastic table. A single small square battery-powered alarm clock was singing away as my brain screamed at me to return to my car. I quickly popped the batteries out of the alarm and hopped back into my car as the silence returned to the orchards. As I was reversing out of the spot, my headlight lights bathed the trees in light again in the same similar shape as now 3 or 4 rows closer, and this time it seemed to crouch down behind a tree. I sat there for a moment, longer staring into the void before my brain screeched. What if there's more and this is the distraction? That thought encouraged me to back up onto the high part of the levee there. I waited for the next 3.5 hours alone. It felt torturous. Like 1,000 eyes were burrowing into every inch of my car and stowed from every angle. The quietness of an orchard is something very unsettling in the wintertime, and there's no insects or wildlife wandering about. All I could hear was silence and my pounding heart for the next 3.5 hours of my shift. I almost wanted some monster to come tearing through the trees, bellowing out, "Here I am, here to eat you." But instead I saw and heard nothing more. My morning shifter shows up late and starts casually drinking his hot cup of coffee as I give him the rundown, while the sun starts to peek into the sky. I still remember the steam trail from his mug and the chirping of early birds as we decided to investigate further into the orchards. We ended up at the spot where I saw the figure, and after some quick scanning, he ended up spotting some really large footprints from boots that seemed to pace back and forth in a line along one row of trees. We then tracked them as they led forward towards the worker's office container, and abruptly stopped near a tree while still a few rows back. Nothing more. No follow-up footprints leading forward or backwards. No vehicles, tracks leading out of the dirt. No one could have gotten past me without trenching through the orchard. It was as if someone appeared, paced back and forth in a line for a few hours, walked forward, and then just disappeared without another step. We reported to the boss and he shrugged it off, saying maybe it was an elaborate prank by the construction workers. But that was one of the last shifts I worked doing security. Definitely made me more of a believer in the paranormal kind of things. I honestly think that the unknown is the scariest thing for a lot of people. Not knowing what something is, what its purpose is, or how to stop it. This means we're just stuck in a limbo state of not being able to protect ourselves or do anything to stay safe. Truly terrifying to then find out there was something there, but have absolutely no explanation as to what it was or what it wanted. Story 2. When I was a kid, around 9 or so, my grandma stayed with us for a couple weeks. We lived in a 2-story house. The upstairs had an L-shaped hallway. My room was at the end farthest from the stairs, say on the end of the short foot part of the L. The bathroom was across the hall from me. My parents' room was on the corner, and my sister and brother, twins, 1.5 years younger, were by the top of the old grandma was staying in their room. They shared my sister's bed. Every door had a lock on it. Now, my grandma would get up to use the bathroom every night around 2 or 3 a.m., which woke me up because the light came right in through my open door. It was slightly annoying, but whatever. I loved my grandma. One night after she was done, I watched as she slowly made her way out of the bathroom. I closed my eyes, but opened them a minute later when I heard the loudest banging on their door. It stopped for a second, and I heard their doorknob jittering like crazy. At first, I figured for some reason one of the twins was dumb enough to lock our grandma out as a joke or something, and she was angrily trying to get them to unlock it. But she was hitting the door so hard. The pounding continued, and I started hearing the doorknob going crazy as well. It continued for at least a full minute, which felt like forever. I was lying completely still out of fear. It didn't feel right. I could feel my bed shaking from the door down the hall being pounded on, yet my mom and dad were not waking up. My older brother's room shared a wall with me, and his door was right across from theirs. Why didn't he hear it? Then suddenly it stopped. No sounds, no noise at all. My ears were ringing from the sudden silence after the racket I had been listening to. The next day, I asked my brother and sister why our grandma was pounding on their door last night, and they had no idea what I was talking about. Nobody in my family heard anything that night. I heard it again a few weeks later. My grandma wasn't staying with us anymore. It was just one of the times I woke up in between sleep cycles. Same thing, sudden pounding and doorknob wiggling like crazy. Then after a minute, it just stopped. I started sleeping with my door closed. A few months later, I was woken up by a loud sudden bang. I opened my eyes and saw my door start to slowly creak open. I went and asked who kicked my door open. But all 3 siblings and my parents were downstairs, eating breakfast. Both of the twins had their own moment in that room. They had the door shut, saw the doorknob jiggling, jumped up and whipped the door open to see an empty hall, where they thought a grinning sibling would be. But nobody heard the crazy pounding on the door like I had. Something about it felt so wrong. Still freaks me out when I think about it. At first, I thought OP was maybe going through sleep paralysis, especially because they said they woke up in between their sleep cycles, which is how a lot of people experience paralysis, since their brain is awake before their bodies. But then OP mentioned their siblings experience the same things, and it kinda leads me to believe that maybe it was the room itself that was haunted. Story 3. So I went to one of the oldest colleges that's still functioning in the United States. Naturally, there are a million ghost stories and plenty of spots on campus that all have a reputation for being creepy as hell during the day, but most especially at night. I'm pretty sure I've physically seen a ghost or two, but neither one of those instances was as unnerving as this one. One night, my friend and I walked to the main campus to grab food from the late-night cafe on campus. Our school's encased with a village of historic buildings / old homes that function as museums with actors in costume and everything. It's a very popular tourist draw. We have to walk by these buildings in order to get back. On our way back, we're walking down the street headed towards the tree-lined path that's a straight shot to the dorm. We were talking and laughing as usual when we had that movie moment feeling where everything just seemed to go quiet and we stopped talking. It wasn't anything we saw in particular that happened, but all of a sudden, stuff just wasn't right. Fear gripped me as if there was some impending threat that my eyes couldn't see, but my body could feel on a deep instinctual level. I looked all around old buildings that I had walked by a million times and just felt threatened, waiting for something, anything to jump out in front of us. The wind blowing the trees felt like I was whipping my head around looking for this unseen predator and couldn't find anything. I was literally cringing away from the fences if something was there. For some reason, my eyes were drawn to the old doctor's house to the window on the 2nd floor. There was nothing there. The house was closed, and I knew for a fact that everything in this little village shuts down at 5 p.m., so no one would be there at 11 p.m. But something was in there, and it was like my eyes couldn't see it. This whole time, we never stopped walking or even looked at each other. My friend was right next to me, but I'd never felt more alone or unsafe in my entire life. We're still silent, but our bodies just keep moving mechanically while my heart was beating out of my chest, and everything in me was on high alert. It was like experiencing a constant crescendo, but no climax. The path back to our dorm was a long tree-lined private road with a massive graveyard on one side. The fact that my friend and I never stopped talking and laughing around each other made the quarter-of-a-mile walk back in complete silence all the more surreal. I barely even remember it, just that we arrived at our destination without ever looking back. Once we got back to the dorm, I just looked at her and said, "Near that house, did you feel it?" My friend, the biggest ghost skeptic in the entire world, said, "Yep, and I don't want to talk about it." It's so cool how so many people have like a story or two where they just experience pure fear, but for no explainable reason. It always makes me believe that our body has like this secret function from when we were caveman that alerts us to danger. It's just so animalistic. Story 4. My first job ever was working at a gas station when I was 15. It was an old building off the beaten path in the Midwest. It had leaked ceilings, urine decayed on everything, dust, mold everywhere, etc. I worked with a bunch of people who were clearly meth heads, rotten teeth twitching, stealing stuff, and even someone who was convicted for manslaughter. That story's for a different time. Well, one part of the job is that at the end of the night, you have to take the trash to the dumpster. You know the scene from SpongeBob when he has to take out the trash on the graveyard shift? Yeah, that was my exact experience. The dumpster was about 50 yards from the back door of the gas station, illuminated only by a single light hanging over the dumpster, and next to the semi-trucks that used to stay overnight there. It was dark. One night I'm taking out the trash, and as I throw the bag in, I hear someone quietly say, Hey boy. I turn around and don't see anything but a few semi-trucks with their lights off. I start to think it's my imagination, so I turn back to the store, and I hear the voice again, but louder, say, Psst. Hey boy. Thinking it was someone who needed something, I said, Hello, can I help you? Come here, the voice said. I still can't see anyone because it's so dark and my gut is screaming, hell no. So I don't say anything back. I just start walking back to the building. At this point, my hair is standing up on the back of my neck and I start to jog back to the gas station when I hear a man's deep voice shout at the top of his lungs, Hey boy. I sprint back to the gas station, lock the doors because we were closing up for the night, lie in my car in the parking lot, and get the F out of there. The next morning, I showed up to my shift in this police tape, several cop cars, and a group of officers talking to my manager. It turns out someone broke in and robbed the place about 30 minutes after I left. When I told the police my story, they mentioned how it seemed to fit a couple of other gas station robberies in the area, and they usually take hostages and rob the store at gunpoint. One person was nearly beaten to death. To this day, I still think about this. I can't imagine what would have happened if I wouldn't have listened to my gut. Story 5. I used to live in an old apartment building. I can't remember exactly how old the landlady's husband built the property. It was a fairly well-maintained building, and the landlady used to have family living there before we moved in. A little while after we moved in, my aunt started having weird feelings and waking up with bruises, mentioning that she felt a weird presence. Well, she talked to the landlady who lived in the apartment below us, and she revealed that a young girl had passed away in the very same apartment that we were now living in. Needless to say, that was all the convincing my aunt needed to bring her medium friend over for a seance. The day rolls around, and since we don't own a Ouija board, she has me draw one up that they can use for the seance. The night passes fairly uneventfully, though they believe they've made contact with the little girl. I'm a little skeptical, but I keep that to myself. At one point, the friend has to use the restroom, but she refuses to cross the threshold between the kitchen and hallway, which had a door between them by herself, so I volunteered to go with her. It's important to note here that the hallway bends at the other end and that around the corner is the back door, which leads to an enclosed stairwell with the living room adjacent to that. The living room was lit by the streetlight outside and was by no means dark. With that being said, I was waiting outside the bathroom for my friend to finish when I happened to look towards the living room and saw what looked like someone's shoulder and head peeking out from around the corner. Except it was entirely a shadow and I couldn't make out a single detail about them. The second I laid eyes upon them, I was hit with a feeling of dread, the likes of which I had never felt before. And the only thing I could manage to say, the only thought that filled my mind was, he's coming. I almost broke down in tears, and were it not for the medium friend coming out of the bathroom, I very well might have. I was shaken up to the point that I noticed something was up and asked what happened. I never told them. I don't know, Opie, I feel like that is the kind of thing to share if you're having a seance or whatever. I mean, it technically means the medium was successful, although it's kind of weird to me that the medium friend didn't think to bring a Ouija board. Story 6. A month ago, me and my friend went out at 9 p.m. to buy cigarettes. No one is allowed to go out after 8 p.m., so it's rare to find an open store legally. So we walked for a couple of minutes. We saw a cop car coming. It was that close that we couldn't run away. They were friendly. They asked what we were doing at this time here. We told them that we're going home. We kept looking for stores anyway. Unfortunately, all closed. So on our way home, we saw a car coming that far away. We expected it's the same cop car. So we turned right to another path on our way, and we saw that car behind us. It was coming towards us. I told my friend it's not the cop car, but this one is kind of suspicious. We kept walking until the car came that close. We thought we were in a parking lot when suddenly a guy opened the car door and said calmly with a creepy voice, "Hey, come here for a second," with a bottle of wine in his hand. Luckily, me and my friend were thinking of the same tactic, walking normally until we reached the next turn, which is 3 meters away. I kept it as a normal station by answering, "Sorry, couldn't hear what you just said," and we ran as fast as the week of when we reached it. He chased us for like 30 seconds, and the scariest thing was that bottle being thrown near my head. I swear to God, I never ran that fast. Story 7. This is true. I was about 14 years old back in the 80s, and I was babysitting for people that were on a bowling team every Friday. I was downstairs watching TV in their basement rec room when I heard them enter the front doors upstairs. It was around the time they were due home, so I thought nothing of it and waited for them to call my name or come downstairs and get me. 5 minutes go by and then I hear nothing. I'm starting to think I may have imagined it, so I just waited out and went on watching TV. Then once again I hear the front door opening upstairs, and this time I hear the kid I'm babysitting saying hi. We are home, so I'm relieved and run upstairs to nobody. And I run around looking for them, and they are nowhere to be seen in the house. I look outside and the car isn't home either. By now I'm freaking out. I ran to check on the little one, he's okay sleeping, and ran to the phone to call my mother, and boom. In comes the couple babysitting through the front door, and they stop dead in their tracks to notice me. Why, there's a ghost staring at them like they're about to murder me. When I told them what happened, that they came home already, not once but twice. And the second time, they actually called out to me. They genuinely looked spooked. Needless to say, I never babysat for them again. I was too freaked out. Story 8. My early 20s, I visited Auschwitz with a close friend who was a prisoner there at night at 18/4/45 and lost his whole immediate family. He gave me a guided tour of his memories. It would take a far more space than a Reddit post really permits to adequately describe. Second, I once sat for someone in a rather nice house in central London for several months. I would sit on the balcony/roof to watch the sunset, city skyline, and smoke. Not grass/weed. The house was entirely empty, but for a couple of grumpy, non-talkative cats. The next closest house was 200 away, with a high stone wall around the perimeter. One night around midnight, a young girl, maybe 12 to 13, started singing. What I think was as if 10 to 15 around the roof of a house or loft. Rather spooked, I covered the whole loft outside the roof area that I could reach in 2 lower floors, but could never find the source. The volume changed based on my movement or location. The singing stopped and started a few times and not sound like a recording, but I couldn't explain it. To my knowledge, I'm not mad. Have never heard anything else like it, and no one played some elaborate practical joke. I still can't explain it, and it still causes goosebumps. The owners also had no explanation. Okay, wait, I kind of really want to hear more about the first story. OP makes it sound like the guy has memories of his past life at Auschwitz and remembers stuff from a previous lifetime. Why wouldn't you share that story under this thread? Story 9. Was staying with my aunt through her divorce. Her kids like me because I play with them all the time, and they're adorably young. And they overheard the yelling, so the smallest one asked to sleep with me, and I did so. I woke up in the middle of the night to heavy breathing, like a grown man catching his breath, and I saw a figure and felt him pull the blanket up to get at the kid. She had a lot of stuffed animals and pillows, so I wasn't that visible and looked like a lump of pillows. As I kicked with my right leg as hard as I could and jumped on him punching, I had him on the ground wheezing and turned the lights on. It was my uncle's brother, and he had a direction. I proceeded to grab the kid and take her to the living room, went back, and he was asking why I attacked him innocently. Police came and got a restraining order for that. My aunt didn't know how he even got in the house, but pretty sure the freak was gonna assault a 3-year-old. So freaking happy I was there to stop, and they were gonna sue me for assault and battery. But since he freaking snuck in the house, I was fine from prosecution. But yeah, do not trust anyone just because of their family. Story 10. I was maybe 4 years old and in a department store with my mom and aunt. I don't know what my mom was busy doing, but I needed to use the bathroom. So she took me into the women's bathroom, which had a few stalls. She opened up one of the stall doors and there was a woman laying on the bathroom floor, face up with blood coming out of her mouth and a puddle of blood under her head. Like she'd been laying there for a while. She was lying on the floor with her head by the door and her feet by the toilet. And she seemed to be conscious because she looked at us when my mom opened the door. I remember her eyes first going to my end. No facial expression. No attempt to speak or make any sounds. No movement other than her eyes shifting away from my end and then making contact with me. My aunt grabbed my hand and pulled me out of the bathroom, and then she rushed to find an employee to explain what she had seen. I can still picture the woman's face clearly in my memory. I never found out what happened to her to this day. Story 11. Some friends and I were campers camping in rural Northern California. Their family had a piece of land they leased near the river and had set a little campground of like 3 trailers and campers. Obviously not as luxurious as a cabin, but you didn't have to set up a tent each weekend and could invite some friends. It had a perimeter of a bamboo fence, which gave the illusion of privacy. But obviously, there wasn't really going to keep anyone or anything out. That night, we hiked up to a vista above the river to smoke a J and look at the stars. Suddenly, from what seemed like across the river, we heard a blood-curdling scream rather than dogs barking. We realized it was a mountain lion, which sounds like a woman screaming. Look it up on YouTube, utterly terrifying. We froze about a minute later and heard the scream again, but this time it sounded much closer. Obviously, we decided it was time to hightail it back to camp. The walk was about 5 minutes, but of course it felt like forever. It took everything in us to move slowly and not sprint down the hill. We had no flashlights, just the moonlight to guide us. And I kept catching glimpses of what seemed like eyes shining in the dark. I can't tell you how vulnerable the back of my body felt on that walk. Every animal instinct in me was terrified of something coming up from behind. We made it back without incident and all took shots to come to ourselves. Maybe you had to be there, but it was for sure one of the top 3 most terrifying experiences of my life. And I've had knives/guns pulled on me, etc. Story 12. Where I live, there's this phenomenon called the Lindsay lights. Basically, a bunch of people who live out here have seen lights appear above the tree line around the bluffs in the area, and they behave strangely, so essentially UFOs. There's even a book about it by a lady and her family who lives in the area. A lot of people have seen them. It's just a known thing in this neck of the woods. One night, my boyfriend and I were driving home. We live on the very top of the bluff, and I noticed a light over top of the trees by my uncle's house, who lives in the valley between bluffs. It was very bright and absolutely still. When I looked at it for a few seconds, it immediately darted off into the distance in less than a second. It was impossibly fast and very unnerving. A few minutes later, when we got home, my boyfriend looked at me and went, "Did you see that too? The Lindsay lights sound really interesting. But it does make me wonder that if multiple people see them at different times, maybe there's an explanation for them? Either that or it's just a UFO that has found its favorite spot to mess with humans."
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.